Glad we weren't talking because I did not know we were already on. I apologize for that. You're going to get a bit of a long pause between the start and the intro. That was my fault. It was already good to go. Anyway, it is good to be back. A lot to talk about, a lot going on. We had a guest last time, and we were off last week. So just a busy time going on in all the world, plus in our personal lives. Say hello, Michael.
Hey, I'm glad to be back. Glad to be with y'all on another Saturday. If you could, do us a favor. I know you hear this from every podcast you listen to or everything that you consume, but like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, just something to help the algorithm.
Well, we are a little bit late getting started today, but you mentioning the algorithm, we can prove it. We've taken screenshots. YouTube is messing with our views.
Yeah.
I think within just hours, or not long after we go off, we can be up at about 60 views, and then the next day later, 30 of those are gone.
Oh yeah, and then you'll get a couple back, then it'll take them away, and then it just never quite recovers.
So the reason why I want to talk about that, I've been looking for something. I've been trying to track it down. It was something that, and I'm not in the habit of mentioning other radio shows or podcasts or anything like that on here, but I was listening to something that Glenn Beck was talking about the other day. There was apparently a leaked Zoom call. I've been trying to hunt it down. And in the Zoom call, I think it was right after the 2020 election, and they pretty much just admit to stealing it. And I think it's got Harrison and Biden on it. And they're talking about the algorithms, and they're talking about, and that's why, you mentioned the algorithm. That's the reason why we want you to like, we want you to subscribe, and we want you to, even if, just leave a comment, because it does, podcasts or YouTube is kind of like comment gobblers, if you will. They just eat them up, and it does help our, but I was talking about the 2020, the Zoom call. So apparently there's this leaked Zoom call with them, and they're talking about, I want to try to find it because it somehow it changed the way that they did the algorithms, the way that they did things on social media. So like if you posted something that was negative, you were marked, you were flagged, which we knew. But then everything that you went to afterwards, they tracked every.
Well, and they also inhibit your ability to find things that would more align with your beliefs.
Yeah. So you heard about this?
Well, no, they're still doing it. So there was the picture of Trump when he's holding his fist up after he's been shot through the ear. They had flagged that. Oh gosh, what do they call it? Their misinformation.
Yeah.
Like it was somehow not a real photo.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've since reversed that, but it's just another way to stifle things that they don't agree with or that show the opposition in a positive light.
So I'm kind of looking at it now, and it is on. What is today's date? The 10th?
I believe so.
So this was let out on the 9th, and of course it is from The Blaze. It's from Glenn TV. It says how dark money elites anointed Kamala Harris to control the election. Really what they did, and they bypassed. They always want to talk about being the saviors of democracy. They bypassed democracy in the way that she was chosen, and the whole idea is, this is what I think. I think, I could be wrong, but I think as soon as the end of August, I think a lot of this popularity that she's enjoying is going to be gone. Apparently, she has accepted a debate with him. I think if Trump will control himself like he did in the one against Biden a few weeks ago, I think people are going to see just exactly what she is and why she's a bad idea.
Well, he needs to follow in the footsteps of Tulsi Gabbard. Let's look at your record.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the big problems with this election is a lot of it comes down to identity politics.
Well, see, you mentioned Tulsi Gabbard. You know she's on a TSA watch list now.
That doesn't surprise me. You clap back hard enough, and they will do everything they can to make your life miserable.
Mm-hmm.
Being a politician, travel is a big part of what you do.
Yeah.
So any way they can kind of put the screws to you. But I think if Trump stays away from this whole she's a woman and whatever ethnicity she is, it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
What we're looking at is who is the best person to run the country.
Yeah.
Who can handle that 3 a.m. phone call saying our base in, the Mideast was just attacked. Stay away from the traps because that's all that is. They're trying to ensnare you, and they go, look, this is misogyny or racism or whatever, just avoid that. Get to the topic. Go, okay, well, whether you like it or not, you were appointed to take care of the border. What'd you do there? We haven't, at this point, I don't like using the word crisis, but it has risen to that level. Like they estimate 20 million illegal immigrants. Well, a lot of those people are probably just looking to make a better life. But what about the ones that are here to do harm or terrorists or spies or who knows what else? Look at the things that she was in charge of, that she was supposed to take care of, and that she didn't. And that's where I would, if I were him, that's where I would go.
So, another something else that's really hit, and this is more local. This is not federal. Arkansas is one of the states that they are really pushing to go back to paper ballots. I'm not exactly sure where I stand on that, because I know what the argument is that 2020 was stolen through the Dominion voting machines, and that is not where the election was stolen. It was stolen in the mail-in ballots. I think instead of wasting all of our efforts on trying to go to paper ballot, which is fine, I'm not against it, but I think instead of just trying to go back to paper ballots, I think we, kind of like what you're talking about with Trump not getting sidetracked, I think we need to look more at making certain that there is proper oversight to all ballots, paper, machine, mail-in. I mean, to me, I'm going, okay, you want a mail-in ballot. That's what a absentee ballot is. So why don't we just stick with the absentee ballot? Oh, it's because people that don't want to get out and vote has to prove why they deserve an absentee. Well, then you get out and vote. Otherwise, stay home.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest threats, or probably the biggest threat to our elections, is the manipulation. When you receive 200,000 votes after midnight, and they're only for the presidential election, they're only for one candidate. I mean, that nobody finds that suspicious. Yeah. Like, it was like we're waiting to see how many we need to push it, and then we'll just keep going. But I'd seen multiple sources where they were talking about the ease of hacking the voting machines. And there's plenty of people out there who have that ability. And then you have to look at, like, if you are the company that produces these machines, you have to be apolitical. Mm-hmm. You have to allow it, have to allow the people to make their selection and not alter it.
That's right.
And it's just like the justice system. It should be the same way. It should be irrelevant which side of the aisle you're on politically. Yeah, if you do the crime, you get the same punishment. But we're seeing time and time again that that's not the case. Everything has become so politicized, and that is my concern with, things like voting machines, because how are these corporate entities at these, like a Dominion, where are they leaning?
Yeah.
Are they going to suppress your vote because they don't agree with you? Paper's a little, in a way, paper, in my opinion, would be more secure because it would be more difficult to alter on a mass scale.
Yeah.
Not saying it couldn't be done,
Right.
but I don't know. As long as human beings are involved, you will have some level of fraud. I mean, there's no way to get around that. It's just, how do we minimize it?
So doing what I often do, I'm going to turn the whole conversation into a biblical standpoint. And in Jeremiah 17:5, God is speaking through the prophet Jeremiah, and he says, "This is what the Lord says: Cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans, who rely on human strength and turn their hearts away from the Lord." While I believe in voting, and we should vote, I that is one of our most sacred rights in this country, and it is one that we should do. A lot of people, they've given their life for it. They've been severely wounded for it. I think that I believe that voting is important. It is one of the bedrocks of this nation. I think what we've got to be careful of is that we don't put our eyes on any human, period. Because I think that I do believe that there's a deep state in this country. I do believe that. I believe that there is a cabal, if you will. That the reason I believe that is because you cannot, if you have a society, if you have more than a group of, let's say, 3 humans, one of them wants to control the other 2. That's just the way it is. I mean, one of them wants to be the one who calls all the shots, behind the driver's seat, if you will. So we know that's just human nature. I think if we're not careful, where we find ourselves is that we trust in human ability. And this is why that God tells us that it's a curse to do so. Because ultimately, this is what costs people's eternal souls during the tribulation when they take the mark of the beast. They are, what's going on is that they are putting their faith in a man. That's really what it is. And this man sets himself up as God. Without getting too deep into the weeds of that is why that I think that with every election, I think this election is very important. I think this election is very vital. I think that this election probably has more importance connected to it than past elections, simply because when you look at the things that they have done and are doing, such as all of the shenanigans that went on in 2020, there are those who want power. They want power, and they want to hold on to it, and they want to keep it.
Well, I think Joe Biden is a perfect example of that. Knowing that her husband is senile, I mean, now the cat's out of the bag. Everybody is, they're all in agreement. He's not fit.
Which we said all along.
Which, yes, I mean, has been apparent for a significant amount of time. Yeah. But she was like, just not letting go. There are people that will literally step on the backs of others, even their alleged family members, mm-hmm. or, their spouse, to obtain power and keep it. What I'm more concerned about is the people you don't see. They're the ones actually running the show.
Yeah. The ones behind the scenes, kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Oh yeah, yeah. I promise you, there's really powerful people who determine what policies and how things go. That's what I'm more concerned about.
Well, it's kind of like this whole thing with just this last week. NBC reported that there was an Iranian nationalist who was here in the United States who was arrested with the intention of assassinating Trump. Obviously, I mean, those guys are always under some kind. I mean, that's the reason why that even right now Kamala Harris has Secret Service protection, because the moment they get the nomination to run, they get Secret Service protection. So for somebody to, but they've been saying that Iran is going to plan an assassination against Donald Trump. You're going, okay, what is this a smokescreen for?
Well, I think that the attempted assassination was a perfect example of what we're talking about with the deep state. If you look, anything a magnitude of 5 or greater is impossible. Mm-hmm. Okay, if you look at all the things that lined up for this to happen, it was no accident.
Yeah.
It wasn't just incompetence. It goes beyond that. If you look, okay, so I don't know if people are aware or not, but when someone who is under Secret Service protection is in an area, they will like literally designate 30 miles, a radius of 30 miles where you cannot fly drones. Mm-hmm. They will contact the FAA and they will put it into the software of your drone. If you try to launch it, it won't take off. So you're telling me that this 20-year-old kid flew a drone twice, once the day of the attempted assassination. So why was that not in place? I mean, like it goes on and on. You know, he had explosives in his van with remote detonators. He got on a roof that was unprotected. The Secret Service did not show up to the morning briefing with the local police. They didn't have a shared radio channel. The radio communications from the Secret Service, which are regularly recorded, were not recorded during the July 13th. And Cheadle tried to say that the slope of the roof was the reason they didn't have someone up there. The slope of the roof is a 112, which is ADA compliant. Like you could put a wheelchair up there. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have repeated requests for additional Secret Service agents that are repeatedly denied. You have a multitude of agents who were there that day who were not actually Secret Service, but were instead HSI. I mean, if you take the totality of everything, I mean, how could you not believe that this was intended? And not by a 20-year-old kid. There was something far more sinister. He was just the fall guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's another there's a Congress, I believe he's a senator. He's a Democrat. Raskin is his last name. I think he's a senator. And he said that if Trump is elected, I mean, he admitted that if Trump is elected, that they will evoke the 14th Amendment. Meaning that essentially that's where that if you were part of insurrection, you cannot hold the office of the president. And the thing is, Trump has never been charged with insurrection. But he says in an interview, I think it was back in February, he says in an interview that if he's elected, that they will not, because he's blaming the Supreme Court. So it wasn't I guess it was back in June, because that's when the Supreme Court meets, that the Supreme Court failed to do their job and hold Trump accountable.
Well, because the Supreme Court knocked down the charge that the DOJ was using. They had charged Trump and 300 and some odd other people with this charge that the Supreme Court said you can't do that because it doesn't fit. Yeah. What they were doing is literally just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that something would stick.
Well, he says in that, he says, The Supreme Court refused to do their job. He said, so come election day, he said, we will invoke the 14th Amendment. He said, if we choose not to recognize all of the electoral college, which says that they are scared that he's going to win. And that he said, I know that this could lead to civil war in the United States. Okay, by him saying that, that's insurrection. That is, you are saying that you are willing to overturn the will of the American people, which, by the way, are the ones who actually govern according to the Constitution. So it sounds like they're the ones who are actually in danger of insurrection.
I agree completely. So we'll completely undermine the foundation of the country because we don't like the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's part of being an American. Okay, you're not going to agree. There's 350 million people here. We're not all going to agree, but you can't turn around and go, okay, well, 50-some% that voted for one and the 40-some% that voted for the other. Well, basically half the population's wrong.
Yeah.
It's gotten to a point where that he's done something right because he's got all of these career politicians and all these yes men rattled.
Yeah.
Like that, there is what I don't think people understand is there's a lot that you see on the front end of politics, but what you don't see is all the stuff in the shadows, the closed doors, the rich and powerful people that have people bend to their will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're seeing an example of someone who has, for a large part, refused to bow down, and you're seeing the repercussions of that.
Well, it shows you how far America has come, and I'm not just saying this in a blame to the Democrats. Even the Republicans have been guilty of this. You see just how far America has come from its intention, what it was intended to be by the founders, and from its founding to the present day, where someone like Trump cannot run, or they are trying to keep him from running because he's not in line to succeed and be anointed to hold that office.
Well, so something that, going back to this nation's founding, when you had the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, they had completely opposing views of how this country should be run and how the government should be framed. But you notice there was no violence. Yeah. It was simply, I'm going to write it out. We're going to disperse it to the American people, and we're going to make our case and let them decide what they think is adequate or what they think is reasonable. Now it's become... especially one side has become so obstinate that the instant you disagree, it's a shouting match, or, the isms come out, or the ist, you're this or that. There's a whole slew of terms they like to use because that used to immediately shut people down. They were afraid to be called misogynist or racist or xenophobic or whatever, right. And what that signals is, yes, there are people who are like that out there, but if I simply have an altering opinion or alternate opinion, that does not denote someone who has ill will. They just do that to try to shut down the argument. And what that means is they don't really have one. They don't have a strong basis or platform, so they've got to do something to try to get you to stop.
Yeah.
And we've gotten away from the ability to just speak and have a conversation and rationalize and discuss things.
Right.
And we're seeing that at the highest levels. We're just not going to accept it. If you win, we're going to find a way to get you out. First, it was, we're not going to let you even be on the ballot. I mean, Colorado and these other states that took him off, they have tried every way possible to keep him from being allowed to run. So the concern I have is how far will people be willing to be pushed? Because if he wins a free and fair election, if it is actually indeed free and fair, you're going to, if you do something like what they're saying, how many millions of people are you going to offend to the point of violence?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can no longer even vote for your elected officials without fear of reprisal, I mean, we're entering a very slippery slope.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And see, that's the other. So Thomas Jefferson said, laws that forbid the carrying of arms disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. Such laws make things worse for the assaulted and better for the assailants. They serve rather to encourage than to prevent homicides. For an unarmed man may be attacked with greater confidence than an armed man. And I was listening to a speech that, is it Tim Walz who's running for?
Yeah.
And he was talking about, of course, he's now in big trouble because this whole thing of stolen valor and claiming a rank, and then, he's never been to combat. He retired. You can Google search it. It's all out there. But there was a speech he was making, and he was talking about, I intend to keep the weapons of war where they belong in war. Well, at the end of the day, anything can be a weapon of war. That's a very broad definition.
Well, so a couple things I was going to interject there. The Bible says that, I'm going to paraphrase, but your home wouldn't be broken into if you had a strong armed man.
Yeah.
And they understand that. They want to strip your ability to protect yourself. The whole reason the Second Amendment was written was it wasn't written by a bunch of guys who had just completed a hunting party. They just liberated a nation. It was to protect the people from tyranny. Tim Walz is the very same person who let Minneapolis burn during the riots. And the 3rd Precinct, you can look it up, the 3rd Precinct requested assistance because they said they were being overrun, and he told them to abandon the police department. And it was ultimately, it was torched. He refused to allow the National Guard to come in because he said it'll just be a bunch of 19-year-old cooks. We won't have any highly trained troops. He took the absolute worst approach to everything that occurred.
So if you are in the military, Tim Walz thinks that you belong working at Waffle House. That's essentially what he's saying.
Yeah. When this is over, I will find the clips and I'll post them in the comments. But he said, we won't have a bunch of trained troops. It'll be a bunch of 19-year-old cooks.
Yeah, I heard him. They're trying to bury all that stuff. Yeah, we will get it up in here. But see, there's something else. Again, another quote from Thomas Jefferson. When once a republic, notice republic, not democracy. Our founders never called us a democracy. When once a republic is corrupted, there is no possibility of remedying any of the growing evils but by removing the corruption and restoring its lost principles. Every other correction is either useless or a new evil. The problem is that we've got a lot of politicians that just simply need to be voted out. That's exactly what they need.
So we need term limits on senators and congressmen. Here's the thing. Joe Biden sat in the Senate for 40 years. 40 years. Like, all they're doing is getting rich, and they're not actually there to make a change. They get comfortable. They get a certain lifestyle, and they get a level of power, and they don't let go of it. I think it should be similar to the presidency, where you get 2 terms and you're out. Because we get these people in there, and like I said, they're not motivated to make a change. They just sit up there for decades. Nancy Pelosi, I mean, there's a whole list of people that literally that's all they do their entire life. And when you look at their accomplishments, they don't really get anything done.
Yeah.
They bicker a whole lot.
Yeah.
But in the end, like what can you, I can't name anything off the top of my head that he did as a senator.
I never have really been able to understand why the founders did not put term limits on them. I mean, I know at the time, no one wanted to stay in Washington, D.C. because at that time it was pretty much swampland and you had mosquitoes and no one wanted to get typhoid or anything of that. That had a lot to do with it, right? I mean, they wanted to get out of there before that stuff started happening. But just like, to make that argument, well, they were kind of thinking about the way it was during that time is not a good argument. I don't give credence to that for the same reason I don't when they try to say that the Second Amendment was for that time when it was muskets. Well, that's not what the Constitution mentions. It doesn't mention muskets. It says arms.
Where in the Constitution does it say weapons of war?
Yeah.
It doesn't.
No.
It just literally here. The other thing is, the men who fought the Revolutionary War had rifles that were either equivalent or it was just plain old hunting rifles.
Yeah.
Like they didn't have, but like they had their own cannons. They had their own.
Yeah.
There was nothing the military had that they weren't allowed to have.
That's the way it was supposed to be. I mean,
technology changes, but your rights don't.
Yeah. Well, you look at when the government abandoned NASA, that was under the Obama administration. Elon Musk jumped right in and took over, and he's actually done better with it than NASA did. That is why that we have those in the government who want to put their hands in the middle of the private sector of the country, and they want to control it.
Because there's lots of money to be made, and there's lots of people who will, I forget the term, but they come in there and we'll give you this amount of money if you petition on our behalf. And so there's lots and lots of money to be made on these huge projects.
Yeah.
If you make sure that we secure the contract for this, we'll make sure you get a kickback. And what you're finding is that people in the private sector, like Elon Musk, can do so much more than the bureaucracy of the government, where you have all this money tied up and everybody wants a piece of the pie and nobody's actually getting stuff done.
Yeah.
You got a guy who, for all intents and purposes, like this is a hobby for him. He doesn't have to do it. I mean, he's the richest man in the world. He doesn't have to send rockets to space, but he's looking at it going, I want to.
Well, and he's also the one. I mean, he is saying that it's going to be costly for the United States or any country to even try to go completely electric. It's going to be way too costly, and he's the guy that is creating the electric auto industry. And he's not doing that because obviously it would benefit him financially. But he knows what it's going to do to the rest of the nation. He also just come out recently and called and referred to himself as a cultural Christian. Now, that does not mean he's a Christian. He's not saying he's a Christian. I think he's actually atheist. He's not saying he's a Christian. What he's saying is that America was founded on Judeo-Christian principles, and those principles have to be preserved, because if not, then what actually makes America great? And it's not Donald Trump or Honest Abe or any of those guys. What actually makes America great is our faith in God, and the fact that we have we build our lives on principles based on God's word, based upon our faith in God, knowing that murder's wrong. So we're not going to go take a gun and kill someone. We may have to use one in self-defense for our lives and even that for our family, but we're not going to use it to go rob somebody, go kill somebody, go do something that is, you can, even still today, you can go into most restaurants, and most restaurants will preserve food. They have a time limit on food. And when that food goes out, they don't throw it away. They'll put it in some kind of bag or something, and then they'll give it to an organization. America's not as wasteful as we're constantly being told that we are. But what's going on is we have a lot of people in our government that want to stifle capitalism, because capitalism puts the power in the hands of the American people. And that is the biggest sin that you can commit amongst the deep state or the elites.
Yeah, well, the love of money is the root of all evil. Mm-hmm. It's not the money. It's when money becomes your God.
Yeah.
And we have far too many people that money has become their God.
Yes.
They love money more than they love humanity. Mm-hmm. And therein lies the problem.
Yeah. And again, like you said, the love of money, not money. James says, where do wars come from? From the greed that is in the hearts of men. The band U2 wrote a lyric that talked about that, and it said that, so they say this is the golden age, and gold is the reason for the wars we wage. Every war that's fought, even still today, every war that's fought, I mean, that's like right now looking at China wanting to invade Taiwan and Russia invading Ukraine. Now, the attack on Israel hasn't really got anything to do with it. It kind of does, but the attack on Israel is simply because they just do not believe that Israel belongs in that land, which again is another problem for Kamala Harris, because she bypassed Josh Shapiro, who is a Jew, because he is a Jew. He is the one who he's the one who stifled and put a stop to the Palestinian was that during the fall or winter when you had the Palestinian protests going on?
Yeah, because
it was in October when Israel got attacked.
Yeah, the attack was in October, and then, here's the thing. People got upset with their response. Well, it's like a 9/11 for us.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's actually probably worse, because they're right there.
Well, here's the flip side of that too. If you look at population-wise, okay, we lost just rounded up to 3,000 people in 9/11. But out of a population of over, at that time, probably close to 300 million.
Yeah.
If you look at, they lost 1,200 people and had several hundred kidnapped, but their population's far smaller. That's a large portion of...
Yeah, and I wasn't so much meaning population when I said worse. I was meaning worse. It's because it would kind of like you being next door to, say Jeffrey Dahmer, okay? You're next door to that guy. Or, Charles Manson. Somebody of that, that's what Hamas is. I'm sorry. I mean, YouTube may take this down. I don't know. But listen, the Palestinians have a right to live, but what they don't have a right to do is destroy Israel. And I'm not trying to be political today, because I don't go for the whole. I do believe that Christians need to get involved in the debate, but when I look at certain things that are going on, and you can see that Kamala Harris bypassed Josh Shapiro for the very reason that he's Jewish, and the biggest, they're pandering to that left radical wing base of theirs. That's who they're pandering to, and they would probably, I mean, go back to when they stormed the DNC headquarters. I think it was there in Washington, if my memory serves. That was just a few months ago. And they were having the protests, and Josh Shapiro just simply put an end to it because they were destroying stuff. And that turned his whole party. I kind of wonder if that doesn't hand Pennsylvania over to Donald Trump, which Harris needs desperately come November.
I guess time will tell in that respect. But what I've never been able to fathom, I know you and I had kind of talked about this, is the left has a virulent hate for Israel.
Yeah.
They don't want to fund them. They don't want, anything to do with them. They're very pro Hamas or Palestine when it comes to dealings in the Middle East. What I don't understand is why you get people like Bernie Sanders and these other Democratic, or well, of course, I guess he goes kind of beyond that into the socialist realm, but why, being of Jewish heritage, they still align with the party? You see, like if someone wanted you to tantamount to your extinction or your extermination, why would you still align? I've never been able to understand.
I think there's a lot of reasons. One, historically, the Jewish people have never believed it was going to happen to them. Going all the way back to the 1930s, Germany, they didn't think that they were going to send them to the gulags and the concentration camps. But also, too, a lot of people like Bernie Sanders do not believe. They believe that they've got Jewish DNA. They believe that they are Jewish to the extent of they descend from Jewish ancestors. But what they don't believe is that Israel as a nation is true Israel. They don't believe that because you've got to go back to the Great Dispersion during the Roman Empire, which Jesus prophesied about. And he told them, he says, when you see your enemies surrounding Jerusalem, which is when General Titus surrounds Jerusalem, he says, when you see that, he said, and you see the desolation of abomination standing in the temple that Daniel talked about. So Daniel also prophesies this time. Now, again, this is eschatology, and a lot of people think that what Jesus was talking about in those specific scriptures was eschatology, was the rapture, but that isn't what he's talking about. He was talking about when Rome would come and they would completely level Israel, the city of Jerusalem. And he said, not one brick, not one stone will be left upon one another. He says, when you see that, woe to the woman who is pregnant or has a baby. Pray that your flight does not come in the winter. Which, again, if he's talking about the rapture, why would any of that matter? He says, if you're on the rooftop, don't even go down to get a coat. Flee to the desert. He is telling Israel, he's telling the Jewish people, don't even try to stand and fight against them. But they did. They didn't heed what Christ told them. And this is the reason why when so many people want to say, well, if God is so good, why did he allow the Jewish people, if that's his chosen people, why did he allow the Jewish people to go through that and to be put into the concentration camps, and God didn't? I mean, go right there in Matthew. Jesus tells them, flee. Don't try to stand and fight. Because what happened is Rome killed, it was over 1 million non-combatants. And then they took the rest of Israel and they scattered them throughout the world. The Great Dispersion, which landed a lot of them in Europe, which would bring them up to the recent history, the 1930s, almost 100 years ago, when Hitler would take over, and then all this stuff would start to happen. But again, we have to look, Palestine is not a real country. If anyone has a right to exist, more so than another, it is Israel. I'm not saying Palestine doesn't have a right to exist, but Israel is the real nation. Palestine's not even a nation. Palestine comes from a Latin term which Caesar gave to them because it is the Latin term for Philistine.
Yeah, which was basically adding insult to injury.
Yes.
With the Israelites.
Yeah, because that was their biggest enemy. David had subdued the Philistines, and being a military commander and leader, he understood military history as any great commander does, and he knew who Israel's number one enemy was. So he names them that.
Yeah, I mean, that goes all the way back to Genesis.
Yes.
They'd been fighting them literally for thousands of years.
Yeah.
There was no greater slap or affront to them than to name it Palestine.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's very clearly written out in the Bible what land was to be theirs. They were a nation. That's why I guess maybe I'll never quite fathom why they don't think they have a right to exist.
Well, that's what I was saying, because they believe that the Israelites the blood was so diluted, that they're no longer true Jewish people. That's why that people like Bernie Sanders don't believe that Israel as a nation is really a nation, that is true Israel. Which also is a way for them to lie and to believe the lie that the Messiah is not going to come, because in order for the Messiah to come in the Old Testament, it had to be of pure Jewish DNA, lineage. Well, he's already come, but they don't believe that. Someone like Bernie Sanders, I doubt he even practices Judaism. Not really. He might do it traditionally, but kind of like being a cultural Christian. It's kind of the same thing. He does it out of tradition, not out of the heart.
Goes through the motions once in a while just for appearance sake.
Yeah. And so that's why that a lot of Jewish people, such as that, and they will vote Democrat, even though because it's like, guys, but if they don't like Israel, they don't like you.
Well, yeah, your own party doesn't like you.
Yeah.
They will specifically choose someone to not choose a candidate of your ethnic and religious background.
That's right.
Like, how do you, I don't know. It's kind of like staring you in the face and you're like, okay, just keep going along with it.
Well, I mean, God always had that issue with them. He always had that issue. I mean, he tells them, as a matter of fact, go back and read Deuteronomy all the way through Joshua. He says, when I bring you into the land and when you turn from me, he doesn't say if, he says, when you do, because he knew what they were going to do.
Well, because look at Exodus, when he takes them out. So he takes them out of Egypt, but then he's got to get Egypt out of them.
That's right.
Which is why it took 40 years. And the only two to actually go over are Joshua and Caleb.
Yeah.
You know, everyone else had to perish because they just couldn't let it go.
Yeah, anyone 20 and above 20, because they're the ones who went in and they scouted the land and they came back and said, we can't do it. Only Joshua and Caleb were the two who said, yeah, we're more than capable. And then at 80 years old, Joshua said, hey, that mountain over there was promised to me. I want it. They said, but you're 80. He goes, my strength is as it was when I was 40. He wasn't. See, there is the key right there. And this is getting a little off topic, but the key is simply knowing what God has promised you and then not relenting until you get it. And you know, that is why that I think it's so vital that the church be revived and we do see an awakening, because I don't think that America right now is interested in firsts, meaning voting Kamala Harris in just simply because she's a first African-American woman. I think that's helping her in the polls, but I don't think that's what Americans are interested in, because I think what a lot of Americans are looking at, they're more interested in $160 will now buy me at the grocery store what $50 bought me 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, first isn't going to do it for us.
So the main three topics are the big three. One is the economy. So that's what I'm saying. If you focus on, well, what has happened to the economy? Because they like to conflate the numbers. We brought all these jobs back. Well, yeah, because you closed everything down.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's not kid ourselves. You artificially stifled the economy, and then you artificially inflated it by saying, well, we created this many millions of jobs. That's because everybody was sitting at home, scared to death that the cold was going to kill them all. So the economy is the number one issue amongst Americans. The number two issue is the border. And immigration. And what Trump needs to do is go, okay, well, places like Texas, Greg Abbott, he put the National Guard and Texas DPS, which is their troopers, on the border with a razor wire, and they were stopping people. And what did Biden do? What did the federal government do? They went down there with forklifts and lifted up the razor wire to let people stream in. Like, it's completely counterintuitive. It's not what the American people want. Like,
Why do they call themselves DPS? Just off topic.
Department of Public Safety. A lot of places still do, but it's the Texas Department of Public Safety.
Okay.
So here you have state police.
I just didn't know if they were so proud of the town Dallas that you were going to call themselves Dallas.
No.
Okay, because I was just wondering, everything else is a state trooper. But I mean, Texas has never really considered themselves a state anyway.
No, I mean, it's the only one that was a country. It's completely independent.
They don't consider themselves a state.
And,
Let's be honest.
their economy is large enough
Yeah.
that if they really wanted to, they could sustain themselves.
Well, they could. Well, really, if you look at a lot of states, the way the founders set it up, most states can operate independently. The problem is that after 9/11, the government convinced a lot of states, hey, you can't make it without us. And so they just keep throwing these.
It's all the federal funding.
Yeah.
If you want money, you'll do what we ask you to do.
Yeah.
It's just like I kind of segue into one of my main topics that I always bring up. But that's why it's so dangerous to become dependent on the government, because they'll dangle that carrot like, well, if you want to get ahead, you have to do what we ask you. They have the same stranglehold on the states. Well, you want this federal funding, then you have to do what we ask you to do, instead of letting the states truly operate independently.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a common goal for the entirety of the country, but each state should determine its own path and its own.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm going to quote Thomas Jefferson. The issue today is the same as it has been throughout all history, whether man shall be allowed to govern himself or ruled by a small elite.
Yeah.
They even believed that back then. I mean, the belief of, deep state / cabal / elite, our founders even believed that. So this is not a new idea that has just come along all of a sudden because we have a MAGA movement or we've had, whatever the case might be. This is something that our government, that's why they revolted, because they believe hey, wait a minute. No, there is an elite that wants to control the lives of people.
Yeah. Well, so my mom and I were talking about, I know I had gotten you hooked on Blacklist.
Yeah.
So if you haven't watched it, watch it. It's a really, okay, well, you don't even have to watch it now. You can just watch the news and you can see that a lot of what goes on in a television show is closer to reality than you think.
It's, what is it? Reality is upstream of art or art or, of art or art's upstream. I can't remember how that statement said, but it's true.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you, like I said, if you look, if I could compile a list of everything that occurred on July 13th in order to allow a shooter to get to an elevated position and take a shot at a presidential candidate, there is no way you could look at it objectively and not see that it was intentional. I simply don't think, and I hope that people realize that, our government, now even elements within our government determine what they want, and they act not at the will of the people, but at the will of those who are, essentially pulling the strings.
Yeah.
Same thing with Kennedy. Same thing with Nixon. I watched quite a significant portion of a interview with, I forget his name. I want to say his last name was Woodard. He wrote the transcript of the Nixon tapes, the one he labeled the smoking gun.
Well, yeah. You're talking about the one who wrote the deep.
Because
was it deep something? I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Ultimately, Nixon had no idea that this break-in at Watergate was actually occurring.
Yeah, Woodard prides himself in ending administrations.
And the whole thing is Nixon and several other high up officials had no clue that any of this was occurring.
Yeah.
And if you look at the main forces behind the scandal, the break-in, it was run by the CIA. The equipment was provided by the CIA. There was one former CIA operative and 4 Cubans who actually broke into the DNC.
So, okay, that kind of leads me into a question. Do we have intelligence agencies or do we not? Is that closer to anti-Americanism? Because Washington had his group. I mean, that's what the whole TV show of Turn was around about, and really Washington did have his clandestine groups. Do we not? Because the intelligence community, they really remind me a lot of the barrack sergeants in the Roman Empire. When they determined that a leader, it was time for a Caesar to go, they just killed him.
I think we've moved much more in that direction. I mean, 1963 is a prime example. Kennedy did not go in the direction that the elites wanted him to go, which is why he was removed.
Mm-hmm. So do we continue with an intelligence department, or we revamp it, we get rid of it?
The problem is, I think here's my own personal belief is that they are necessary, because what the purpose of the CIA is to collect intelligence from around the world to give to the president and his advisors so that they can make the most informed decisions regarding events in the world.
But they've been caught with their hands in the cookie jar on several accounts, deliberately feeding bad intelligence.
Or either misinformation, or like you said, becoming outright involved in essentially a coup.
Yeah.
But that's what you have to have some way of gathering intelligence on your adversaries so that you are capable, if something were to arise, you would have a formulated plan on what to do.
Right.
But I think the main issue is that they operate with such little oversight, or they simply have so much power that they determine what they think is.
So we keep the CIA, get rid of the FBI.
Honestly, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the way any of the alphabet agencies are set up.
Yeah.
Because once again, if a law enforcement agency like the FBI would operate without political bias, I don't think there would be an issue. The thing is, it's against federal law to treat someone differently because of their race or their ethnicity or whatever. What they've done is they treat people differently depending on what party they come from, and that's an issue. Either, like I said.
So I guess. Go ahead.
They always, the old adage, justice should be blind.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's equal dispensation of. I say that all the time. Equal dispensation of the law. It shouldn't matter who you are, who you align with. If you commit a crime, the punishment is the same for you as it is for someone else. The problem is, it is no longer that way, which makes it extremely dangerous.
So we need a federal police force to enforce laws that are, because obviously once they cross state line, they become federal. One of the reasons why, we have some problems is because a lot of district attorneys from state to state don't want to communicate and deal with certain crimes,
or they don't agree with the punishment, or
So you kind of have to have that blanket federally.
Yes.
Which goes back to, and I'm not trying to cut you off, but it goes back to, because we had a podcast, I don't know, about a month or two ago, where we kind of talked about all of the federal police departments. I mean, because that's what the U.S. Marshals were. The U.S. Marshals were given to us George Washington is the one who commissioned the U.S. Marshals. And, of course, U.S. Marshals at that time were primarily used for territories' potential, candidates for statehood, which eventually they did become states. I think that's where our government continues to compound on it. It's almost compounding interest. And Einstein said that's the eighth or ninth wonder of the world. I think it was the ninth wonder of the world. They continue to add all of these federal police forces until what they've done is they have gotten themselves to where, I've noticed, have you noticed on Netflix how many documentaries they do that just really lamblasts local law enforcement, making them all look like they are incompetent?
Yes.
And granted, I mean, Barney Fife struck a nerve with people for a reason, because you've always had that guy out there. But the average law enforcement, and I don't have to tell you, you've been there, but the average local law enforcement is not that bumbling idiot.
No, well, so here's the thing that kills me. So I've talked about this before, but with all these defund the police movements, what you don't understand is that 80% of a police budget is simply to pay the officers.
Yeah.
20% is for equipment, for training. When, excuse me, when you defund the police, you're taking away from their ability to train.
Yeah.
If you want people who have better training, if you want them to know what to do in particular situations, you actually have to allot them more money.
Yeah.
It's counterintuitive. The more you cut a police budget, the worse police you're going to get.
Yeah.
I promise you, police don't go into it to make money.
Yeah.
When I retired, I was making, I don't know, $50-something thousand.
Yeah.
But that was as a sergeant, and that's with a college degree, and that's with, all the other things that come along with. Yeah. It's not a lot of money.
Well, a lot of people want to argue, and I think it was Obama who, was he the president that really lambasted the militarization of the police? I think it was him.
Yes, but
and part of me agrees with that, but the other part of me looks at that and goes, okay, we know why he was doing it. And a lot of the reason why he was doing it was because, we already knew he's the one who said he was a community organizer. But again, even with militarizing the police, that goes down to politics. Know your mayor. What does your mayor think of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence? What are those? How does he or she stand with that? How do they square with that? Because they're ultimately the ones who are going to, use or abuse the law enforcement.
Yeah, well, and going back to, do we need a federal law enforcement agency? And the answer is, to an extent, yes. Because if corruption does occur, okay, nobody's going to deny that.
Yeah.
If there is corruption amongst municipal police, I would say the state police would need to investigate them. But what if there's an allegation that the highest level of police force in the state is corrupt, or there's something going on? You need someone who is independent, who can examine that and determine whether there's been actual wrongdoing. And it needs to be someone who is involved in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Because it would be like me going to an electrician and trying to look over their work. I know nothing about. I know electricity makes lights turn on, but I don't know what wiring is adequate.
Right.
I don't know And so when you take someone who has no prior law enforcement experience and then you have them oversee,
Yeah.
they don't understand what is the use of force, what is the appropriate level of force, there's a multitude of things you have to take into consideration. And if you have no background in it, and I know I'm totally getting off topic, but fights are not like you see on TV.
No.
I've been in plenty of fights like where it's not pretty.
Right.
It is not scripted. It looks bad. But you know what? When you get somebody who is extremely determined to not be placed under arrest, it takes a lot of force to get them to comply.
No, fights are not even like what you see in MMA or boxing, where you've got two professionals who know what they're doing. And as one person put it, those fights are like a dance, because both people are, they know what they're going to do. But no, you're right. I mean,
there's also the added danger of weapons.
Yes.
There's also, there's a million things. As a police officer, you have to maintain control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think where a lot of police officers get hung up is you have to maintain control, but sometimes you can do that simply by speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But I always had, and I don't know exactly where it came from, probably from some of the first supervisors I had. But I ask, and then I make.
Yeah.
Or I ask, I tell, then I make. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you, like if I needed you to have a seat, like we're trying to figure out what's going on, be like, Thomas, can you have a seat for me? Just sit down so we can figure out what's going on.
Just comply with it.
When you don't do that, sit down.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you again. Go ahead and have a seat.
Yeah.
And then when you don't do it again, then I'm going to make you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that is a whole, go ahead.
But there are situations where it's not even plausible.
Right.
You got somebody who's hopped up.
PCP or something.
Oh
crazy.
yeah. We had a guy one time, hopped up on PCP and nothing but a bathrobe and a jock strap. And he landed up kicking the back door of a locked police unit out and escaped. And one of the supervisors tackled him into a bush. Unless you've actually fought someone flat out and they're hopped up on drugs or they're having a mental episode, you have no idea how strenuous it is. Right. Even, before I was sick, I was strong. And there were times where you're dealing with someone, for instance, I got in a fight one time with a guy. The suspect was like 155 pounds. And at my peak, I was probably 245, 250 without my gear. And so, between I always called it my Batman belt, but, between my gun belt and my body armor and everything, I'm probably, looking at 275, 280. Yeah. And I'm on top of this. Well, actually, I'll end up taking him to the ground. And then one of the other officers, who was probably in excess of 300 pounds with his gear on, is on this guy's back, and he's pushing off and kicking. And
he was on drugs?
Oh, he was a nice mixture of cocaine and methamphetamine. I don't know what. So he didn't feel it. I tasted him twice.
And didn't feel it.
And the one thing was it was captured on body cam and surveillance footage and everything, and it didn't look good.
Yeah.
But what you don't understand when someone is like that, their adrenaline's flowing and they're full of drugs, it's not going to look.
Well, that was the argument about when they were saying send in a psychologist, and before you send in the police. And you're going, well, okay, good luck with that.
You can't rationalize with someone who is on a dissociative anesthetic, which is what PCP is.
Yeah.
There is no reasoning. Their mind is not functioning like you or I. They are in a totally different world. Yeah. You get people on hallucinogens. They're seeing stuff that's not even there.
Right.
Who knows what they're going to think you are?
Well, there was a video, and it may still be on YouTube, but of police officers having to deal with people on PCP. And there was this one sheriff's deputy. He rolls up and he stops, and there's this guy, and I mean you can't hear him, but you can see. I mean he's growling. And have you seen it?
Where he whacks him with a stick?
No. Oh. This guy just he stops and hangs out, and he says, "I'm not even going to get out of my vehicle." He said, because he's talking on this camera. He says, "I'm not even going to get out of my vehicle." He said, "Backup's on its way." He said, "I'm just going to wait on them." He said, "This guy's definitely hopped up on something." He said, "Probably PCP." He said, "But something that I don't want to have to deal with by myself." All of a sudden, this guy comes charging and just jumping until he's about ready to crush in the front windshield, when finally backup does arrive. I mean, and this guy was a big guy. I mean, he's not some small guy. I mean, and again, I mean, the joke around here is that I always bring up the Nazis or Germany. But one of the things that the German soldiers did was put their soldiers on PCP, and American soldiers always talked about shooting them, and they wouldn't go down.
Yeah, well, Nazi meth. Yeah. So the one I thought you were referring to, there was a sheriff's deputy that got out to confront a guy who was either having a psychotic episode or was on some form of narcotic. God, who knows? But the guy has a large stick and starts whacking or beating the sheriff's deputy. So the sheriff's deputy is probably... he's within arm's reach of him, shoots the guy 12 times in the chest, and the guy's growling as he goes down, but it just keeps coming. I mean, you can see the guy's shirt moving, like he's putting rounds in center mass, and the guy just keeps... Yeah. The human body, when it doesn't know that it's supposed to shut off, is quite fearsome. Mm-hmm. But
it goes back to the adrenaline thing, right? I mean, where there are stories of women who literally lift cars up off of a child or their husband. I mean, there's almost a supernatural strength that comes from that.
Yes, and then you couple it with things that don't make you feel pain.
Yeah,
because one of the things that inhibits your body from doing something that would damage it is, in your mind you go, "Oh, I can't do this. I'll blow my back out, or I'll tear a hamstring, or I'll tear a bicep." Well, when you're either under an extreme dose of adrenaline or drugs or both, your brain isn't functioning like that. You're just, there's no rationale. You're just doing it.
It was like that boxer back in the 1980s. And of course, it changed the course of professional boxing. I like boxing. I'm a bit of a boxing fan, but he was in a fight and he ended up suffering a concussion or something, which the problem was that it actually extended. No, it had something to do with his heart, and they had not done tests. This was back in the days before boxing commissions made him go through absolute physicals. Yeah. And he went through the fight, and the damage was already done. And it wasn't until the fight was over, about 45 minutes to an hour later, and his adrenaline had completely went down, and he just collapsed and died.
Well, so that's another thing. That the public doesn't understand is what you call excited delirium. So you're fighting someone who is either, like I said, they're having a psychotic break, or they're on drugs, or any of the combination, and their heart rate is, above 200 beats. Their heart will literally explode. And all you're trying to do is contain them. You're not even trying to fight them. You're just trying to restrain them. They will die. And then, the thing is, well, the police killed them. It's like, no. In all likelihood, even if they hadn't intervened, they would die. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they actually have a better chance when you can get medical personnel to them. But I promise you, MIMS or Patford or any of these other emergency services are not going to approach someone like that until they're subdued. Yeah. Like, it's a catch-22. You can't help them until they're restrained. And you can't restrain them until you physically do it.
But to kind of wrap some of this up, I think kind of going back to the original question, out of all the, and I'm not saying this because George Washington gave them to us, but out of all of the federal police agencies, the one that you don't hear with a lot of corruption involved, is the U.S. Marshals.
Yes. Well, so something I had intended to bring up earlier, without prolonging the podcast too much.
Oh, you're fine.
Is the something I've noticed that is an extreme issue with the alphabet agencies, is like, for instance, with trying to get answers about why something occurs, like why did the attempted assassination, how did it occur, that there's such a level of bureaucracy within these agencies that you can't get a straight answer.
Mm-hmm.
You go to someone and they refer you to a spokesperson who refers you to someone else who refers you to someone else. You can't, they've got it buried so deep and the water so muddied that you don't know who to actually go to get a straight answer. Right. That's a problem. We have too many. There's too many federal agencies. I mean, we started listing them off a few podcasts ago.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need all of those.
No.
And, you know, like before 9/11, they didn't regularly communicate. You know, so you've got all these different agencies. It's like an octopus. You know, they have a brain for each arm.
So the federal agencies fell into the very same trap that was used against local law enforcement in the 1918s, teens, and 20s. Hey, the local law enforcement agencies aren't communicating, so we need a federal law enforcement. I mean, because you can't have that many hands in the cookie jar.
Well, and it's a lot of it comes down to not wanting to share the glory with anyone else.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's our information. That's our investigation. We did the work and they don't want to share.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the exact same problem. You know, you had all these different agencies and they'd have somebody on a watch list or they were under surveillance, but they wouldn't relay that to another agency. Like, what a quagmire.
Yeah.
But they have created so many levels that, like, if you want to know who's ultimately responsible for the debacle that occurred last month, where do you go?
Where do you go?
But because they've got it under such, there's so many layers to peel back.
Well, that is the argument for local law enforcement, because of the fact that anything federal is going to be so isolated that you can't get to the initial issue when you need to.
Well, the thing that really perturbs me is the fact that you've got these oversight committees and you've got these men and women in Congress who want answers and they can't get them. So you know that you or I are not going to get them.
Yeah.
There has to be a way to get the information that is necessary to determine, like, where mistakes were made.
Yeah.
And they have done a really good job of making sure that that's not possible.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of these agencies could be either eliminated or drastically reduced. And the fact that they will flat out defy Congress ought to tell you everything you need to know. That they're operating outside of the parameters of oversight. They basically do what they want when they want, and they aren't going to comply if they get caught doing something they shouldn't have.
That way, you mentioned the show Blacklist. You know, federal government a lot of times reminds me of the guy Glenn who worked at the DMV. You know, where he just deliberately messed with Raymond Reddington just to, get him going. And I often use that. I'm like, when people think, well, we need to expand the government. Really? Do you want to expand the government? Go sit down at the DMV for, I just had to go get tags renewed. And I sat in there for well over an hour And then when they called my number, the woman's literally going, I was number 21. And she's like 18, 19, 20, 21. I get up. She goes 22. This guy gets up and starts walking in front of me. I was like, wait. I'm 21, man. If you overlook my number, I got to go back and sit. And that is the thing with government is you're going, guys, we got to have the government, but don't expand it.
The larger it becomes, the less efficient it becomes. Yeah. And when you have less efficiency, you have more spending. And like I said, it becomes inefficient. Mm-hmm. Anything, the larger you get, the more inefficient it becomes.
Yeah.
The government is no different. Are a lot of these things necessary? Yes.
Yeah.
But to what extent? Like they've grown and grown and grown. Mm-hmm. And there's... if you look at the amount of money the government spends, I mean, it's astronomical. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that could be trimmed down, but too many people are getting rich at the expense of the American people.
Yeah. Well, and I don't think you mind me bringing up the homeschooling. I mean, you guys just decided to homeschool your kids. I mean, right there's a perfect example. I mean, Department of Education, and you look
the Department of Indoctrination.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you look at the presidents who have promised to end the Department of Education, and look, George Bush did. George W. Bush wanted to end the Department of Education. Trump has vowed to end the Department of Education if he gets in. Look, I'm not saying that they are the core source of evil here. But the moment you start messing with anything in the federal government, be it the intelligence community all the way to the education community, you're going to have a fight because those guys are scaunched. They don't want to go anywhere.
There's lots and lots of money tied up in it. We just simply, with everything that has gone on and with some of the things that especially my oldest daughter was saying that she quote unquote learned at school, we decided that it simply was a better option to teach them ourselves. And not only that, but the problem I always had in school, especially when I was younger, is that I wasn't challenged. Because they can only move at the pace of the slowest of the class.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you've moved beyond that level, you're stuck. And so I get bored and I doodle and I do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, then, fast forward, I'll end up getting pulled out and put in what their gifted and talented program called Zenith. And then I was in the equivalent in middle school. When I got to high school, I was in all AP courses.
Yeah.
But what I found was that if you're like in the regular algebra class, you're going to do all the odds for homework. You're going to do all the odd problems on page 35. Well, when you're in AP, it's do all the odds and evens. I was just doing double the homework. I wasn't actually learning anything in addition to...
You sure you weren't put into MK Ultra?
Well, who knows? It didn't work, did it? I can't tell. And so I ended up dropping all of my AP courses because I found myself... I was also playing basketball, and I was up until 12 or 1 every morning doing homework.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not learning any additional information. I'm just doing more homework.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
If they were actually giving me a challenge or giving me something beyond the basic level, I would have been more satisfied.
Well, I work in education, and one of the things I find is that most of our problematic students aren't bad kids. They're unchallenged kids.
They're bored.
They're bored.
And what do bored kids do? They want their mind wanders.
Yeah.
They need something on which to focus.
Yeah.
And so I think that, like I said, I love, there were several things. My second grade teacher my mom's friend said that you should have him tested because she thought that I was above average. And So they sent me to, I went, I don't remember where, hopefully my mom would remember, but this is unfortunately approaching 25, 30 years ago. They sent me to a place to have a formal IQ test where they sit you, and it was almost like a dentist chair, and they have a projector, and you had to solve the problems in your head. You weren't allowed to write anything down.
That's that CIA stuff, man.
Yeah, well, so apparently I had a quite high IQ score, and they sent me back to the school, and then I took they had some kind of creativity test for Zenith, which like they would give, for instance, they would give you a squiggly line. You had to turn it into something. And so I remember it was almost essentially the shape of an S. And so I took it and made it a king cobra coiled up and made sure to draw scales on it and the little pattern on the hood.
It's like that. Whose line is it anyway? Remember that show?
Yeah.
Where they take those, start making stuff out of it?
Yeah. And so apparently I scored really high on it. I don't know how. To me, that would be very subjective. Like you look at it and go, so anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed, they would give us word problems or, picture problems. You had to look at it and use problem solving skills. But it was far beyond what we were doing in my regular classes. And so I was always excited to go.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I was
you were learning. You were learning.
And one of the other major issues I see with the education system is it's a very nice, neat, tidy little box. Mm-hmm. They don't teach you to think critically. They want to teach you to a test and then shove you out the door. Yeah. And the thing that I ascertained going through school is that especially college, it was so overtly political, and for no reason. Yeah. Here's the thing: like in English class or something that has nothing to do with politics, it would always come up. My personal philosophy is that if you are doing your job as a teacher, none of your students should know your political affiliation.
No.
You give them the information and let them determine which side they agree with.
Right.
And that simply isn't the case.
No.
And I spent many, many lectures arguing.
Well, that goes, that proves the point of the importance of a capitalist society, a republic, or a society such as ours, that you have the option to go, our kids are not learning, so we're going to use alternative, and we're going to homeschool, or we're going to put them in private school or Christian school, whatever the case might be, somewhere where they are going to learn and taught to think critically.
Well, we need children and adults that can think independently and not just blindly believe whatever they're told. You need to be able to look at something critically and go, that simply doesn't make sense, right. or not be so gullible to just accept whatever someone tells you. Yeah. And that simply isn't the case. I had told you about this before, but I had professors that would record their lecture, and they would say something. For instance, there was a lot of disinformation that came out in one of my history courses that was based on, at the very best, pseudoscience. And so I won't go into that because it's not really, the topic she chose is not really appropriate for this podcast. But however, I confronted my professor on it, and I asked, is this historical fact? And she's like, no, this is the interpretation of the forerunner of the CIA, analyzing video of someone and determining their sexual deviancy based on video.
That's scary.
And it was a certain leader from Germany, and
they were saying he was homosexual.
Well, that yeah, I can't. I'll tell you when the podcast is over. But it had to do with sexual deviancy with Ava Braun.
Okay.
And that anyway, I said, is this fact? Is there any concrete evidence? She said no. This was some Freudian analyst who looked at it and said, well, this is what their assessment based off of a recorded speech. And I said, whether you have a fervent hatred for him or not, I said, is this historical fact? And she said, no. And I said, then why do you teach it as such? Even if you dislike someone, that doesn't mean you can just spread disinformation. And all that was wartime disinformation. Like it was a smear campaign. There was plenty to legitimately smear. I mean, you didn't need to just make stuff up. But I had a history professor one time at the very beginning of the very first day. He was talking about himself, and he went on and said, blah, 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 and I hate the Alamo and what it stands for. And so I stayed after class, and I said, well, blah, blah, blah. I rebutted to everything he said, and I said, I love the Alamo. Is it going to be a problem, or should I just drop your class now? I was quite confrontational, and I wasn't willing to compromise my stance simply to earn a grade.
Well, that's where a lot of the, movies like Minority Report with Tom Cruise comes from, is because that's exactly what they're doing in those movies. They are assessing and basically predetermining what a person's proclivity is, and you can see it. I mean, you can go find documentaries where they'll have people take someone's skull, just the skull, the shape of the skull, and say, okay, this person probably was a serial killer. Now, I do understand, because I was talking to someone earlier this week, you can look at certain features on some people and you can kind of predict the personality that they are.
Well,
but that doesn't mean that's,
there is, yes, to an extent, because okay, for instance, I don't know if you've ever heard of the warrior gene. There's the warrior and the worrier. And so what they found a gene that in people who have the warrior gene, they typically act more aggressive. In fight or flight, they will fight instead of fleeing. And then there's the warrior gene. They're far more likely to avoid confrontation.
Warrior or warrior?
Warrior and worrier.
And which one is likely to stand and fight?
The warrior.
The warrior.
So you can Google that, warrior gene. I actually have that. But I think a lot of it comes down to nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
The other thing they found is a lot of people with tendencies towards being a psychopath have that same gene.
Yeah.
Because
I'm not denying that happens. I'm just meaning I don't.
But
it's scary how they will judge.
But if they look at just your genetic component, they'll go, well, this guy's a threat.
Yeah,
that's not necessarily true.
No.
I was raised in a good home, or I mean, every home has its issues.
Yeah.
But I wasn't locked in a cage and beaten and whipped, and
right.
I wasn't locked in a closet and only allowed to eat on every third day or something. So just because someone has this quote unquote feature or this gene or this marker does not necessarily a serial killer make.
Right.
And they like those blanket statements. I say certain elements of like the government, if you're a farmer and you are an independent thinker, you're a threat.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah.
They like those blanket statements only when that applies to the opposition.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. And, but that will wrap up the Exchange podcast today. And again, this has been a good exchange. we are at number 84 episode wise, and the goal has been, I was hoping to already be here, but the goal has been to get 100 subscribers by the 100th episode. And if YouTube keeps messing with our algorithm, we may or may not get there. Facebook, we're already kind of there, but I want to get there on YouTube. But like, subscribe, share, tell your friends about it, comment, help us out here, guys. Comment and join the exchange, because we don't want to just be on here controlling the conversation. We want to hear your thoughts. And thank you for everybody that has listened today. And if you again, like, subscribe, share, tell your friends. And we'll see you here next week. What do you got, Michael?
Well, I wanted to say that we really, and I especially appreciate the support, but we cannot grow without y'all's help. So if you find time to devote to things that you enjoy and the things that you care about, if you could spend an extra 2 minutes and write a comment, it could be something super simple. Just hit the thumbs up. We cannot get this podcast disseminated efficiently without your help. Mm-hmm. We need you to help. And we appreciate you just simply listening, but just go that extra step. Spend the 2 minutes, 3 minutes to write something, or if you have a question, you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, you want to pick our brains about something, just that little extra step would help us out a ton.
Leave it in the comment section for us. If there's something you want to talk about, or if it's something you want to talk about, the comments are open. Let's watch the language, but the comments are open. But if it's something that you would like for us to discuss, let us know. We're here to do it. We want to do it, and we love doing the podcast. Can't wait to see you here next week. Go with God. Be blessed.